Oh no. Okay, just how bad is this video gonna be?
Oh god, oh man! Oh god, oh man!
Well, that was shit. Hey guys, XBadgerKnightX here, and today we're taking a quick detour from my normal content to respond to a video that popped up on my YouTube home feed. And because of that style of video has worked wonders on my channel before, I've decided to do it again.
Wait till you see the... No, 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 no.
This video in question is called Female Objectification in Media, a Persona 5 case study by the YouTuber Salari. If you'd like to watch Salari's video for yourself, a link to his video will be in the description. After watching this video, I came up with the impression that this video is incredibly dishonest. Salari's attempts to examine Anne Takamaki through a Western feminist lens without mentioning all the nuances of her character strikes me as very underhanded and very irresponsible. I have several issues with this particular video, and I really think Salari does gloss over quite a bit having to do with Anne, Ryuji, and so much more with Persona 5's cast. I honestly have so many thoughts on his take that I really felt like I needed to make a full response video. The main reason why I wanted to do so was the inclusion of these lines within his video.
As much as I love this game and its predecessors, there are problems, not just from a gameplay perspective, but how it represents certain things. The series is heavily rooted in Japanese culture, and Japan doesn't have a great track record in regards to how women, people of color, and LGBTQ people are seen in society and represented. There's been some strides in recent years when it comes to giving creators from various backgrounds a voice, but in Japan, where Persona 5 was produced, that growth has been insignificant. And it's no coincidence that women and everyone else are seen as less than men in Japan. Anne has chosen this path. She decided that she is fine with the world admiring her for her beauty, and she knows how people see her. I'm sure that some people would argue that because Anne is accepting of the world seeing her as a beautiful person, then we as an audience shouldn't see it as a problem when the game does so too. The problem here though is that when the game objectifies her, it's done to titillate the audience. One theory I'd like to talk about that's relevant to how women are portrayed in media is the male gaze. This theory was created by feminist film critic Laura Mulvey. She claimed that the male gaze is when women in film, and by extension all visual media, are portrayed through the lens of a heterosexual male. This occurs via three perspectives, one through the eyes of the creator, one through the male characters within the media in question, and lastly the perspective of the audience. Because all forms of media are largely dominated by men, it means that the way we see women in media as a whole has created a standard in how they are represented, and that standard has been set by men. Some people argue that even within media made by female producers, the male gaze can still be present, as their works may have been influenced by male-produced media, thus perpetuating the standard created by men.
It is a huge oversight by Salari to include this bit within the video, mentioning Japanese culture, and not use that to expand upon Anne's character in Japanese society, but elect instead to rail upon Anne's portrayal in Persona 5 through a Western feminist lens, using archaic and reductionist film analysis techniques like the male gaze to try and prove his points. I suppose before I jump into this video, I should try and qualify these arguments lest I come off to everyone else as some neckbearded contrarian. On my channel, I have a mainline series of videos called Dichotomy of a Character, where I analyze certain characters in fiction that I find compelling and well written. This series was mostly made as a response to the change in Western media that largely advocates for identity politics first, with good character development and storytelling falling by the wayside somewhere. I got sick of being gaslighted by morons who thought that I was somehow a misogynist for simultaneously wanting good female characters and good writing to coexist within a story, and not just blind and vapid representation. There are literally dozens of examples of how to write good female characters, and that for the most part is the goal of my Dichotomy of a Character series. For one, I want to show those who stumble upon my channel that these are indeed compelling and well-written characters, and failing that, show them that these characters at least exist. This is why I like to take a holistic approach to most of the videos on my channel, which is why my character analysis videos are very long, ranging from 1 to 3 hours in length. As a matter of fact, I'm so committed to not doing halfsies on my channel that I made a 7-hour review of Ghost of Tsushima over the summer, my most ambitious and dumbest idea for a video to date. I don't like to omit or gloss over details in my videos, and I find that even the smallest detail put into a story or any bit of character development was put there for a reason. So, I talk about that for a while. If you're interested in watching and listening to what I have to say, click the card in the top right corner of the video that should be appearing right now. It'll link you to a playlist with all the videos I just mentioned. This is also the part of the video where I ask you to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at @_badger, but get ignored. And to that I say, I dare you to prove me wrong! Hit that subscribe! With all the shameless plugs and opening context out of the way, we can now get into the rest of the video. I'll start this video with a comparison to one of my other favorite Japanese characters ported to the US, followed by reasons why the male gaze is an ineffectual and reductionist way to look at characters that exist within any story, then follow up with one of my favorite depictions of female characters in anime, then then video games, and then finally, circle back to what Salari thinks to be problematic about Ann's portrayal within Persona 5, refuting those claims by introducing a concept of what a hafu is within the context of Japanese society, and how Salari himself blatantly glosses over many aspects of Persona 5's cast that disingenuously talk about feminist film theory. Let's get started. In order to understand why the differences between Western and Japanese interpretations of fiction are significant when looking at foreign media, I need to bring up everyone's favorite beastly social commentary, Gojira. After the US dropped 2 nukes on both Nagasaki and Hiroshima to pacify Japan at the end of World War II, then continued to use and test nuclear weapons in the Pacific, obviously made the Japanese particularly anxious. And what better way to commentate upon these issues by making the nuclear bomb a giant hulking metaphor in the form of Godzilla? Gojira, or Godzilla, was created by Japanese film company Toho in the 1950s to serve as a giant hulking metaphor about post-World War II Japan's fear of the atomic bomb. Brilliantly executed, being both overt and subtle in its messaging, 1954's Godzilla remains a classic to this day, so it only was a matter of time for American Hollywood to come in and screw all that up. Back in the 90s, American screenwriter Roland Emmerich wanted to retell the story of Godzilla to an American audience. This was the first time that Toho, the Japanese company responsible for creating Godzilla in the first place, wasn't to have a hand in retelling the Godzilla story to an American audience, and that was overall to the film's detriment. In Godzilla 1998, it seems the American solution to fighting a big giant monster was to bomb the hell out of it, when its original namesake was a testament to how weapons of mass destruction beget more violence and fear. Godzilla was created as a social commentary about the Japanese's inherent fear of atomic warfare post the US dropping nukes on 2 of their cities in World War II. So by having the US military kill him with an airstrike flies in the face of everything the character stands for in Japan. Veteran Godzilla actor Shizuke Kaneko pondered on the treatment of the character that was given by the studio, stating, "It is interesting that the US version of Godzilla runs about trying to escape missiles. Americans seem unable to accept a creature that cannot be put down by their arms." In the most recent movies by Legendary, when one of the characters in the movie, Ken Watanabe, says this,
"The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control, and not the other way around. Let them fight."
it is the closest the Western world has ever gotten to understanding the reasons why Godzilla exists. Mankind should not be meddling with shit they don't understand, including nuclear weapons. Recently, the Japanese created a sort of soft reboot of the Godzilla franchise called Shin Godzilla, meaning New Godzilla in English, all the way back in 2016. This new version of Godzilla was much more gruesome and grotesque and disgusting, but was only a sideshow to what the movie was actually trying to convey. Most of the movie was about bureaucracy and how to respond to a threat that nobody was prepared to face. To the Japanese, ever trying to be an independent nation in the post-World War II world, call for international assistance but risk looking weak in the process? Do they call upon the same country that bombed 2 of their cities into oblivion for help? Or is this an international situation that they can manage on their own? And to the character of Kyoko Ann Patterson, played by Japanese actress Satomi Ishihara, who in the film is a Japanese American who serves as a liaison between the Japanese government and the United States government. Her main conflict within the film was preventing the United Nations from dropping another atomic bomb upon Japan, which is a pretty significant moral dilemma to say the least. Depending on how you look at it, this will be the 4th time Japan has suffered the wrath of a nuclear attack, with the first 2 being the city busters the US dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, followed by the Fukushima nuclear reactor meltdown disaster in 2014, and Godzilla's fictional appearance in the film 2 years later after that particular disaster. Throughout the film, it is Ann Patterson's job to stop the UN from taking the fate of the Japanese people into their hands by coordinating with the Japanese government on how to stop Godzilla. Not before he destroys Tokyo, but before the international community has to step in and do it for them with a nuclear bomb. Of course, at the end of the film, the obvious social commentary comes into play. Godzilla becomes a statue amidst all the destruction he caused, and there's a possibility that he could wake from this cold compound slumber. This, to me, again, speaks directly to the Japanese society's fear of the A-bomb. And if you were from the West seeing a localization of this movie, you might understand the how, but not the why. You fucking idiots! So what do criticisms of Godzilla have to do with Ann and Salari's video? Well, Salari's assessment of Ann as a character is very comparable to how the subtleties of Shin Godzilla and most other Godzilla films could be lost in a Western audience. To qualify that point, let's begin by touching on the few bits of obvious Japanese commentary that exists within Persona 5. Exhibit 1. Joker's arrest. Joker is seen standing up to a drunken Shido who wants to take advantage of a woman. Joker, being the morally upstanding person that he is portrayed to be in the game, steps in to help. This is commentary because Joker, as a minor, is expected to obey everyone who's older than him carte blanche. While Joker might not know who Shido is at this point in the story, it is important to understand the context of what the writers are trying to convey through this encounter on a subtextual level. Shido is a corrupt politician and a scumbag who seeks to overthrow the Japanese government. He is seen throughout the game flexing his power and influence to get what he wants. By having some random kid just show up and start questioning his power and authority is very significant. Joker blatantly rejects this aspect of Japanese society and is punished for it within the game. When Joker meets his caretaker, Sojiro, he chastises him for sticking his nose in someone else's business.
You protected some woman from a man forcing himself on her. He got injured, then sued you, right? That's what you get for sticking your nose in a matter between two adults. You did injure him, yeah? And now that you've got a criminal record, you were expelled from your high school.
Exhibit 2. Joker's interrogation scene. Now, police brutality is social commentary that I think everyone can understand regardless of what media it's portrayed in. But again, Persona 5 is a Japanese game commenting on Japanese culture, and the scene within Persona 5 is even more powerful when the context is understood. Japan has a 90% conviction rate due to police officers largely beating suspects in assigning confession letters. In the game, Joker was also drugged and possibly waterboarded as seen by the puddle of water in his interrogation room. Sai, his legal advocate, can't even stop them from doing so.
あの連中聞こえてるきっとここでは何でも起こるわ私じゃ止められない
This is all because the higher-ups in the government see Joker's case as an open and shut one. Joker, and by extension the Phantom Thieves, were considered terrorists by the Japanese government, and when he voluntarily turned himself in, he was seen as guilty before ever being tried for innocence. Exhibit 3. Joker's gaze. Joker's gaze. Joker's gaze. Joker, when he's on parole, wears glasses to hide his judgmental and piercing gaze. It is clear from the prologue and from the beach scenes that Joker does not need glasses to see well, so this again is part of Joker coping with Japanese society's expectations of him as a felon. Staring at someone who is of higher social standing, such as a teacher or an adult, is very taboo in Japan.
That look in your eyes irritates me.
Joker's persona reveal directly showcases Joker's judgmental gaze that also mirrors that of his interrogation scene. He's forced to adopt a meek and passive personality due to him having a criminal record, when that's absolutely not Joker's personality. Joker, when he's dressed up in his Phantom Thieves uniform, is the opposite of meek, and he's kind of a show-off. Again, this contrasts heavily with the collectivist nature of Japanese society. Joker is expressing what makes himself unique, by showing off as he's being pursued by the police. The police in the opening cutscene could be seen as agents of greater Japanese society, who show up in great numbers just to take down one guy flaunting his individuality. It's also worth mentioning that in the Persona 5 anime adaptation, they included a scene where Kamoshida is being pretty relentless towards Joker before the volleyball meet. Eventually, Kamoshida hits Joker square in the face and knocks off his glasses. But Joker does not fall over. He skids backwards, still standing, and being the confident badass that he is, he stares directly back at the douche, who is trying oh so hard to embarrass him in front of his peers. Kamoshida then gets intimidated by Joker's intense and confident gaze, so he calls over Mishima, someone who Kamoshida has pegged as being weak and meek. Exhibit 4. Futaba. Futaba is a direct social commentary on the Japanese social phenomenon known as hikikomori, in which people jaded by Japanese society seek total withdrawal from that society by never leaving their homes, electing to watch anime or play video games to avoid the social pressures and expectations of their culture. This is why context is incredibly important when analyzing certain media forms, especially when those forms of media are made in foreign countries and strictly commentate upon issues that plague that specific country's culture. This is why we're going to spend the next part of this video refuting Salari's claims about the male gaze and how such a reductionist manner of looking at media in general is ineffective at the very least and unethical at the very most.
One theory I'd like to talk about that's relevant to how women are portrayed in media is the male gaze. Male gaze. This theory was created by feminist film critic Laura Mulvey. She claimed that the male gaze is when women in film, and by extension all visual media, are portrayed through the lens of a heterosexual male. This occurs via three perspectives, one through the eyes of the creator, one through the male characters within the media in question, and lastly the perspective of the audience. Because all forms of media are largely dominated by men, it means that the way we see women in media as a whole has created a standard in how they are represented, and that standard has been set by men.
Oh boy, intersectionalist film theory. Do feminists, especially those who believe in intersectionality, realize how insane and neurotic this take sounds? That all standards in media are perpetuated by the patriarchy, and even some women who go out of the way to write stories for women are still products of the male gaze because they're tainted by the patriarchy? That is crazy! This is a problem with intersectionalism in general. It's supposed to take into account everyone's unique life experiences with oppression in its various forms to find common grounds for social change. Instead, intersectionalism romps every bit of nuanced perspectives that makes these individuals unique, recognizing that they are oppressed and nothing more. If Salari's claims about the male gaze are indeed true, that every bit of media created in the history of ever is a product of the patriarchy, regardless of context or the genders of its creators, then it stands to reason that a particular scene in one of my favorite Netflix shows is a product of the male gaze, due to intersectionalist feminist film theory sticking its nose where it doesn't belong. According to the male gaze, then this image I'm put on screen right now is problematic because it sexualizes and objectifies women. Context be damned. In this shot, we have a man browsing through pictures of an attractive woman on his phone. As per the male gaze's musings on film, this shot is inherently misogynistic. Context be damned. But what if we put in the context? If you don't know where this still image comes from, allow me to enlighten you. This is a still from Netflix and Marvel's Jessica Jones, a show about, you guessed it, Jessica Jones. An alcoholic female detective who possesses super strength and suffers from PTSD on account of her being sexually assaulted by a literal mind rapist. The show has been lauded for its gritty and adult tone, as well as being an incredibly accurate representation of how survivors of sexual assault cope with that sort of trauma. After Kilgrave, the man who assaulted Jessica is presumed dead, Jessica's life falls apart. She has frequent panic attacks and resorts to drinking to drown her sorrows. She also approaches sex casually as a means to reclaim her agency after losing it to Kilgrave. Jessica also doesn't wear any revealing clothing in the show and does her best to cover up her body and feminine features with her wardrobe of darkly colored leather jackets, ripped jeans, and combat boots. In the show itself, Kilgrave has seemingly risen from the dead to harass Jessica once again by using his mind control powers to harm those that she cares about. Kilgrave offers Jessica a deal, saying that he won't harm anyone so long as Jessica sends him selfies of herself every day at a specific time. The only way for Jessica to stave off Kilgrave is to play into his hand, which is some fucking horrible shit. After years of dealing with being mind controlled by Kilgrave, thinking that she was done with him, she's right back under his thumb. This is why context matters when analyzing film, and examining media through reductionist lenses such as the male gaze is incredibly disingenuous. I also find it very ironic that by pointing out that all women in all forms of media exist only to please men, the male gaze actually strips these female characters of all their agency that's given to them by the creators within the story. Per the male gaze implying that all women do indeed to exist men within all forms of media, the male gaze ironically strips women of the power and agency that was given to them by their writers. And in striving to protect women from being objectified by men in media, the male gaze ironically and holistically harms how women are represented in said media, by reducing them to victims of the patriarchy and nothing more. Failing to understand or mention the weaknesses of the male gaze is the reason why people like Anita Sarkeesian have ceased to be relevant in the feminist space.
Over the course of this series, I will be offering critical analysis of
No,
many
no, no,
characters
no.
but please keep in mind that it's both and even
It is perfectly possible to be critical of something, yet love it at the same time.
Wait a fucking second.
Studying how video games or indeed media objectifies women in particular isn't a new or even groundbreaking subject, and it's something that hasn't always been embraced with open arms, lest we forget.
Oh, well, the rest of this video is starting to make a lot more sense now.
They got to him.
Okay, that segment contained a lot of jokes and absolutes, so let me just back it up here for a second to explain myself. The reason why I felt like to make a video responding to Salari and his opinions about the male gaze relating to Persona 5 is that I personally identify with Persona 5's cast of characters and their journeys through the plot, but mostly with Ann or Ryuji. Ann reminds me of how I was discriminated based on my looks and physical features when I was in middle school. I was constantly bullied by the boys who I wrongly assumed were my friends, who I hung out with every day before school since 6th grade, despite being pushed around both physically and emotionally. I was constantly led on by girls who would run up to kiss me at the car line and then tease me for trying to pull away, calling me a certain 3-letter word. These same girls also constantly asked me if my ginger hair matched the drapes. I specifically remember one time my parents rolled up in the car to pick me up right as those girls kissed me and I once again shoved them away. I got in the car and they asked me if that was my girlfriend. What was a 13-year-old Badger Knight supposed to say given the circumstances? There's no way I could tell them about the context of why these girls were going after me. For all intents and purposes, I was on within Persona 5. I was the odd one out and I was relentlessly bullied for it. Until sometime in the 8th grade where I realized my folly. It was on this day where I became Ryuji and hit the evil douchebag in charge, who'd been bullying me since the 6th grade. I whacked him square in the fucking nose. And guess what? The little shit had the audacity to run to one of my teachers and report me for hitting him. We both got suspended, but I got saddled with a harsher punishment because I chose to stand up for myself after years of being tormented. And because he came back to school earlier, he started spreading rumors that I hit him for no reason, which is obviously not true. After I came back, everyone started giving me the side eyes and treating me like some sort of violent psychopath. I stopped being harassed by the girls at the car line, probably because they were afraid I would hit them. I also stopped getting harassed by the douchebags I hung out with before school. I stopped the harassment. Mission complete, right? But I also spent every day before and after school very lonely and very bored. It is in this aspect that I am jealous of Ann. Atlas wrote her best friend to be someone that actually gave a shit about their feelings and troubles. I had nobody like that until my sophomore year of high school, and they moved away after graduation. and are currently stuck in a foreign country because of COVID. This is why I'm so critical of feminist film theory and the male gaze, as it discounts my own personal experiences with legitimate trauma because it implies that I, a man, serve no other purpose when watching or creating any form of media other than to oppress women, which is fucking absurd. Salari is of the opinion that even when anime creators attempt to provide context to why some of their characters are scantily clad, those reasons are never justifiable under any circumstances. However, I can think of one anime in particular where such objectification is completely justified, and that is what we will talk about next. Salari also does this bit within his video where he shows some objectively bad representations of women in anime using shows like Kill la Kill. Now, I do agree that these are pretty bad, and I will concede that in the Persona 5 anime adaptation, there's a few questionable decisions when regarding its female cast. The one decision that actually kind of frustrates me is when the main cast is trying to figure out Makoto's codename, and the anime just cuts to a shot of her butt. It's really odd. This really does irk me, because the dialogue and the writing are trying to build up Makoto's character and how her Phantom Thieves outfit relates to her true feelings and beliefs, and we get a gratuitous shot of her butt. What makes the shot even more strange is that the next couple close-up shots of Makoto are done to build upon her character and to give her a codename based on that particular bit of character growth. The next couple close-up shots are clearly the viewer looking through Joker's perspective, who's trying to look at Makoto's outfit to try and come up with her codename. This kind of blatant fan service gets in the way of the writing, and that's why it really does annoy me. Now, with that being said, Salari doesn't really offer a balanced perspective on the matter. If anything, this sets up a false dichotomy. Instead of offering a more balanced perspective of female representation in anime, he offers only examples that are objectively the worst. By setting up this false dichotomy, it paints all anime as having poor representation of women, when that is by and large not the case. I'm now going to attempt to provide a more balanced perspective on the matter by giving some examples of good female representation in anime, while also admonishing Salari's take on this following clip.
Sometimes the creators try to justify the clothing through story or themes, like how in Kill la Kill, Ryuko's battle outfit, or kamui, is so skimpy because the fibers feed off the blood of the wearer, and if it covers less surface area, it keeps them from being overwhelmed by it. I'm sure that some people would argue that because Anne is accepting of the world seeing her as a beautiful person, then we as an audience shouldn't see it as a problem when the game does so too. The problem here though is that when the game objectifies her, it's done to titillate the audience.
One of my favorite shows that I just can't get enough of is Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girls. On the surface, it might just seem like an anime full of racy fan service, but then again is only a surface interpretation. The girl in the bunny suit does actually serve some narrative purpose. One of the main driving points of the plot is something called puberty syndrome, where someone who's experiencing adolescence is also experiencing some sort of supernatural things happening to them. The leading lady Mai's experiences with the supernatural in adolescence have to do with her wanting a break from being in the spotlight all her life. Ever since Mai was a child, she's been involved in Japan's idol and film industry through no choice of her own. Her mother forced her and her half-sister into the industries at a young age. When the show begins, Mai has a strong desire to just completely disappear from the public eye, which takes its form with the show's concept of puberty syndrome. Her sickness manifests as her turning invisible to the naked eye, and her peers slowly forgetting her mere existence. I mentioned that Mai was forced in the modeling industry at a young age by her parents, and I like to think that Mai wearing a bunny suit is clearly a last-ditch effort for people to try to notice her. If we take into account her personal history, Mai's decision to do this makes complete and total sense. Through working in Japan's callous and unfeeling model industry since she was little, Mai has probably attributed her self-image, visibility, and value through physical beauty. Mai is likely trying to work out how to get people to remember her through the only way she was taught how to do. As the show continues, it becomes clear that Mai's issues don't lie with her wanting to literally disappear because of some bad experiences as a model and actor. Her sickness actually stems from her feeling unloved by her parents and wanting others to love her as Mai the individual, and not Mai the exploited model. Sakura, the main protagonist, slowly helps Mai heal by befriending her and doing this at the end of her arc.
Mai-san! 好きだー！好きだ好きだ好きだ好きだ好きだー！バニーガールの格好だってもう一度見たい！ぎゅっと抱きしめてみたいし、大好きだー！
I also suspect that part of the reason why Mai acts so tsundere towards protagonist bluntly comments towards her is due to a deep-seated hatred of herself and her career. So yeah, the titillating bunny suit does actually serve a narrative purpose within the story. Oh, and I'm also not done yet. If Salari is still keen on analyzing media through a Western lens, then let's actually take a look at some Western media. Mass Effect and Dragon Age are one of my favorite RPGs out there, and as the series progressed, BioWare definitely upped the sex appeal of some of their characters. For some reason, this bothered some people who likely never played these games, and thus lost the nuance and narrative significance of the respective cast of characters. I'm going to quickly focus on one character that seems to catch the most flack for her looks. Miranda Lawson of Mass Effect 2 fame. Miranda's first introduction to the player is that of a ruthless ice queen in a skin-tight jumpsuit who guns down one of your former allies. The contrast that exists between Miranda's outfit and renegade attitude has the intended effect in making the players strongly dislike her, so the obvious thing for the players in Mass Effect 2 to want from Miranda is to soften her up and make her more likable. Through speaking to her, you find out that Miranda has had extensive genetic modification, to which she mentions that it wasn't her choice to be like this. This was due in part to her father's influence, who didn't create Miranda in the traditional way, so to speak. Miranda was created in a process similar to cloning, where her father mixed his genetic material with that of various donors. While Mass Effect 2 doesn't make it clear why Miranda's father would want a dynasty composed of genetically perfect daughters, the themes of Miranda's struggles are the things to note here. Miranda has since struggled to find her place in the world, and that's why she joined up with Cerberus, an organization who saw value in her skills beyond what her father envisioned her life to be.
Does it always have to come back to your father's genetic tailoring?
This is what I am, Shepard. I can't hide it. The intelligence, the looks, even the biotics. He paid for all of that. Every one of your accomplishments is due to your skill. The only things I can take credit for are my mistakes.
Miranda has since come to terms that her looks, reflexes, physical strength, and ability to use space magic are all designed to give her an edge. As far as Miranda is concerned, it would be foolish to hide from her genetic enhancements and not to take advantage of them. She's figured out that all her doubts were someone else's point of view, and wakes up to smash the silence with a brick of self-control. Ergo, the reasons why she wears a skin-tight suit and why she possesses that icy attitude of hers. As Shepard says to her in a separate conversation,
I like to know where I fit in the world. It helps me find meaning in how I was created.
You are who you are, Miranda. You don't need to make excuses for it.
Miranda's character conflict comes to a head where she has to ask you for help. Miranda reveals she has a younger twin sister. They're the same age, but identical in every other way. Miranda once made a decision to kidnap her sister away from her egomaniacal father, and commissioned Cerberus to keep her sister safe. Miranda has also maintained a no-contact policy regarding her sister, as Miranda herself likely wants her sister to have a normal life free from her father's drama. If Shepard decides to pursue a romance with Miranda, she acts all frustrated and confused, partly because she spent her entire life trusting nobody but herself. She spent her entire life looking over her shoulder, defending herself and her sister from her father. She is afraid that trusting and caring for somebody else might put her and the people she loves in mortal danger. As a matter of fact, the last time Miranda put her trust in someone, she was betrayed by one of her close confidants for a large sum of money. On another level, if pursuing a romance with Miranda, she might be confused that her perfect genes, something that she again attributes to what make herself unique, are allowing herself to get distracted and attached to somebody, so she tries to rationalize it as something foreign.
I don't know what this is. If this is stress, or just blowing off steam, or...
What are you so afraid of? That you might actually start caring for somebody?
This is no time for emotional entanglement. What idiotic bunch of hormones thought that now was a great time for love?
In Mass Effect 3, Miranda finds herself mired in her father's drama again, and tries to go after him alone while also simultaneously having to hide from the organization that she thought valued her for her skills. Shepard offers his help throughout the entirety of Mass Effect 3, but she's still a bit reckless and thinks she can handle herself in this regard. This almost cost Miranda her life in the final entry of the trilogy, and it's at this point in the franchise where she finally understands.
Sounds like you thought of everything.
Not quite, but... nobody's perfect.
Miranda concludes her character arc by realizing that somebody who is, by definition, perfect can still make some questionable and human decisions sometimes. This aspect of her character is later built upon in the Citadel DLC, where she legitimately tries to be normal by going out with her best girlfriend and or boyfriend for a night of gambling, drinking, and stupid decisions. Miranda's character touches on some very interesting themes, such as abuse, gaslighting, and unnatural, or I suppose in this case, natural beauty. What would you do if someone had a life all planned out for you, that you would amount to nothing but a social tool without a use, left screaming until your ears bled? Oh, but because she's in a skimpy outfit, we should throw the baby out with the bathwater for the sake of being more PC, right? Both Benigro Senpai and Mass Effect 2 are very blunt and very open about the sexual objectification of their female cast members, which is arguably to their betterment. How else are you supposed to send a message to the audience about how everyone is susceptible to the human condition, despite being genetically perfect in every other way? That everyone, no matter their background, can make mistakes, and that nobody is indeed perfect. What better way than to be completely ballsy and show what effects that being a child model can have upon an individual, than through a last-ditch effort to get people to notice her for what society has valued her upon? If I'm not allowed to take heed from Miranda's character arc just because she's in a skimpy outfit, I don't know what to say. Speaking of being speechless, let's move to some of Salari's criticisms of On and the Persona 5 cast as a whole, and what he failed to consider when speaking about them in the context of greater Japanese society. Persona 5, more than any other game I've ever played, comments more about societal issues more than anything else I've played to this date. At this point, I would consider the game to be about social justice, something that advocates for serious societal change through a form of media. Again, this game strictly focuses on issues that plague Japanese society, so examining An's place within that culture through a Western lens is disingenuous at least, and examining her character through a Western feminist lens is insane at most. I didn't bring up Godzilla, Miranda, and Mai for literally no reason. An shares some of the same themes that all these other characters hit upon with their respective arcs. For one, An didn't ask to be created, or in this case born, like Miranda is. She didn't ask to be naturally attractive, and that is something that she has to deal with in Persona 5. Also, if we compare and contrast Benigro Senpai's character arcs with that of the Persona 5 cast, we can actually see that they hit on some of the same story beats. We have the actor who's stressed out and unhappy about her life and job with Maya and An, someone who tries very hard to fit in with Japanese society in Tomoe Koga, Makoto, and in some aspects Ryuji and An, but we'll get to those later. And we also have an arc within the show that parrots Kasumi and Sumeru's arc within Persona 5 with Mai and her half-sister Nakota that commentates upon her success relative to her sister. Now, why did I just set up this comparison? Well, I'm comparing these two forms of media because it's interesting to me that both forms of media are highly critical of various aspects of Japanese society, and that they were also released within 3 years of each other. So when Salari says this in his video, it comes off as blatantly dishonest.
We can include powerful messages in media that resonate with people without undermining them because of their gender, sexuality, or even race. There's been some strides in recent years when it comes to giving creators from various backgrounds a voice, but in Japan, where Persona 5 was produced, that growth has been insignificant. And it's no coincidence that women and everyone else are seen as less than men in Japan.
Both forms of media are literally advocating for Japan's future generations to correct its culture. There is a reason why Joker begins Persona 5 by standing up to a corrupt politician, and the game ends with the Phantom Thieves saying the following.
You're not gonna sit back and watch some crook wreck this country just because of his goddamn ego. Ain't that right, leader?
Hey, you can see his face.
Yes. Before that happens, we will take this country.
However, there's something that's missing from Bunny Girl Senpai that is extremely important to understanding An's place within Japanese society. But first, we have to back it up again. Part of the reason why I brought up the character of An Patterson and her role within Shin Godzilla is because she is very much like An from Persona 5. Both Patterson and Takamaki-san within Japanese cultures are known as Hafu, someone of both Japanese and foreign descent. Funnily enough, this label created by Japanese society also has something to do with the atomic bomb, so we need to understand its association with both characters to proceed. This term was coined by the Japanese in the post-World War II era of Japan, where Japan saw an influx of 5,000 to 10,000 children sired by American soldiers occupying the country, who were later abandoned once the occupation was over. Japanese mothers, who were often demonized for getting with Americans in the first place, had to deal with raising a child alone in a collapsed country while also dealing with the social stigmas of miscongeniation and raising a child out of wedlock. It is no surprise that up until the modern day, Hafu has become a derogatory word in Japan's homogenous society for illegitimacy and discrimination, leading some to adopt the biracial identity, with their foreign behaviors being suppressed or discouraged while in Japan. It comes as no surprise to me that a culture that was forced to change many times under duress still takes pride in the homogenous culture. I mean, at some point in the country's history, it closed itself off so the samurai could yell Omae wa mo shinderu for several hundred years before realizing that they needed to drop the whole Bushido thing and modernize. If you're interested in learning more about this aspect of Japanese culture, I recommend watching a documentary called Hafu, the mixed race experience in Japan. It follows several Hafu who are Ghanaian, Mexican, Australian, and of Korean descent, and how each person experienced some form of discrimination throughout their life in Japan. It's a good watch, and I would recommend it. Anyway, back to Patterson and Takamaki-san. Both characters in both kinds of media struggle with their sense of identity as Hafu. Patterson in Shin Godzilla is the daughter of an American politician of Japanese descent. While it's not made clear in the film, it can be gathered that her mother might be Japanese. Patterson wants to become president of the United States, but for now she serves as the Hafu ambassador to both Japan and America in the film. Throughout the film, she's seen feeling the pressure of her heritage, and it's all the more significant that she advocates for the Japanese to solve their own problems instead of having the Americans intervene with a nuke. In terms of Japanese culture, An possesses some form of an original sin that she cannot get rid of. Instead, she has no choice but to embrace what makes her unique in a culture that doesn't want to break the mold. As a Hafu, An has told to deal with the stigma of being considered foreign in Japan. She also, like any other foreigner away from their home country, is fetishized as being easy and exotic, while also thought to be incredibly stupid, unable to handle Japan's rigorous educational systems. An also states within Persona 5 that she's lived in Finland for most of her life, but had to move around to various countries due to her parents' careers in the fashion industry. Throughout her life, she's had to adjust to various cultures and school systems, and while that might have been easier for An to do in places like Finland, where she could pass as a normal white girl, it gradually got harder for her and came to a head when she moved to Japan, where she has lived ever since she was a young girl. While I couldn't find any evidence of the following within the game, the wiki states that part of the reason why An might be seen as an airheaded gaijin by her peers and teachers alike is due to a poor academic performance in everything but English, the lingua franca for the international community. Also, in the memento sequences within Persona 5, she reveals that her poor grades are actually the result of a lack of willingness to study and do better, stating that whenever she tries, she just ends up slacking off instead. In Japan, others would interpret this as An just being straight up lazy, but An's reasons for slacking are absolutely more complicated than that. Due to her moving around a lot as a child, An has definitely experienced some amount of educational whiplash. The only amount of education that could have possibly stuck with An was her English speaking skills, a skill which she got to develop while traveling with her parents. Couple that with the parents disappearing from her life for half the year to work, and we find out why An's grades are suffering. An is, once again, being demonized by Japanese culture for something that is quite literally not her fault. Years of isolation have clearly left her very withdrawn, with a belief that she's lost her place in the world until she finally met her first Japanese friend, Shiho. Shiho is literally the only person in Persona 5 who gives Joker the benefit of the doubt, and who actually gives a shit about other people's feelings. An empathetic attitude is a rarity at Shujin Academy, so it's all the more significant that An is friends with her. Through using Shiho as a confidant, An can mostly ignore her peers' attempts to smear her as an airheaded gaijin, but when Kamoshida seeks to drive a wedge between them, An feels incredibly powerless, going wherever the wind takes her. She and Ryuji also possess blonde hair, and have been told by their peers and teachers to dye their hair black. I'll come around to this in more detail later, but it's also worth mentioning that even as a part-time model, An is discriminated against based upon her physical features as a hafu. At one point in the game, her agency contacts her to tell An that she's been shoved off the candidate list on account of it being a black and white photo shoot. The photo shoot, as explained by An, was supposed to provide a very stripped-down version of models on account of muting all the colors and showcasing the model's natural beauty. An in this particular photo shoot wouldn't stand out, as her agency likely values her foreign looks such as her blonde hair and blue eyes. They also could have just hired a model who passes for a traditional Japanese woman with black hair and eyes, so not as a clash with the aesthetic of the shoot. Regardless, the implication that she got passed over for a gay because she wasn't Japanese enough is still very troublesome. An, while in class, also has to deal with Shujin Academy's teachers like Mr. Ushimaru, saying that the generation is a bunch of babies who need to be taught how to be proper citizens by their betters. Ushimaru then tries to pull on Socrates' musings on the origins of evil, saying that individuality begets ignorance, which then creates an evil society, being totally unaware that the two have no association with each other. Mr. Ushimaru is clearly coloring Socrates' Western philosophy with his own thoughts of how a just and morally upstanding society could exist within Japan. The two perspectives are not compatible. Generally speaking, Socrates did not have his own definition of truth, as he believed in questioning what others believed truth was. He believed that genuine knowledge came from discovering universal definitions of key concepts, such as virtue, piety, good and evil, and governing life. Essentially, Socrates believes that truth comes from a collection of individuals who have their own unique views on what truth and justice is. Ushimaru completely misses the point of this teaching by Socrates, that there is no evil, only ignorance, by ironically spreading his ignorance and or evil to his students. Effectively, when in the context of Persona 5 in Japanese society, both Ryuji and An are being told to effectively change what makes them individuals. It is no coincidence that before Joker learns of An's real name, he judges her based on her looks and by how much she sticks out, and this is why the game refers to her as flashy female student instead of her name. It is also very significant for Ryuji, someone who's considered to be an outcast by his peers, and as someone who has known An since middle school, to casually say the following.
Still sticks out. Hasn't changed a bit.
An sticking out is also done with Joker at the start of the game when he first meets An. He's so shocked by how different she looks to everyone else Joker's probably met in his life after she removes her hood, that he cannot help but stare. It's also no coincidence that the animators chose to hide An's unique features like her blonde hair, unique hairstyle, and her blue eyes from the player within this cutscene to make An's introduction more profound, especially when compared to Joker's straight-edged and meek appearance. Where you might go, but Badger Knight, le male gaze, to what's to say, shut the fuck up, Joker's unironically looking respectfully. And given Joker's stalwart defense of that woman Shida was trying to force himself upon at the start of the game, it's unlikely he's thinking of trying anything here. Now, if you want to argue that the animators want to sexualize An based on the camera panning up from her legs, then chest, then to her head, then I think the answer to that would still be no. This is clearly an establishing shot. Remember, this is the first time that we meet An, and first impressions are indeed everything. Before meeting An, the camera pans right and briefly follows some female Shujin students. We then cut to Joker getting distracted by his phone until a hooded figure walks by, catching him off guard. Camera pans upward from showing the player An's outfit. Red leggings, and her iconic varsity jacket that she somehow squeezed into a suit jacket. This already contrasts pretty heavily with all the female students that we just saw running by in full uniform. Whoever this person is, she's different in some way or another. This establishing shot of An culminates in her removing her hood, piquing our curiosity and showing us what makes her truly unique. Also, as a quick side note, would it help my argument to mention that I thought An was initially a guy due to her wearing a varsity jacket? Just throwing that out there. Anyway, moving on. Another bit of foreshadowing to An's individuality can be seen on her hoodie she wears in the first semester of school. An wears a varsity sports jacket with a 4-leaf clover stenciled on the hood. In the context of the story of Persona 5 itself, the hoodie is probably an item that An holds onto for sentimental reasons, which is why she wears it to school almost every single day. However, the most likely explanation is that the writers are using the clover as a means to add to An's unique appearance. As some of you watching might already know, the 4-leaf clover is an extremely rare variation of the 3-leaf clover, and according to traditional sayings, the 4-leaf clover is rare enough to only find in 1 out of 10,000 4-leaf clovers, although more formal studies have found that it's actually 1 in 5,000. It is debated whether or not the 4th leaf mutation was caused through genetics by a rare recessive allele appearing in small amounts of offspring, or if the clovers themselves grow under the leaf due to environmental conditions such as low sunlight. The former reason has some implications about An as a character, and could indicate why An wears this jacket with a clover, both as a clever bit of foreshadowing, and also showcasing some internal conflict within her. An's hoodie clearly indicates that An is trying to grow within a garden filled with 3-leaf clovers that want her to cut off her 4th petal to fit in. If our unique 4-leaf clover An would have lived everywhere else in the world but Japan, she would have been considered a winner of the genetic lottery, or at the very least, average. And if we're talking growth stats for Finland, she's actually slightly above the average height. The national average for a Finnish woman at the age of 19 is 165 centimeters, or 5'4". However, it should be noted that some of these measurements are a little skewed because of the conversions between metric and imperial measurements. An is technically 5'5", but she's not 5'4" either. Also, everywhere but the Persona 5 wiki says she's 5'6", which would be about 167 centimeters. So regardless of how you look at it, An is either average or somewhat exemplary as far as her Western looks go. Anyway, I digress. To Japan and to her peers, she has lost the genetic lottery by simply being different. Her peers and teachers alike want her to be 150 centimeters tall with jet black hair and dark brown eyes. An's looks, such as her blonde hair, blue eyes, and An herself being taller than almost every other woman in Japan, have only served to hurt her in the long run. An is being told that what makes herself unique is actually a hazard to herself and those around her. An internalizes this because she has no one else to talk to and starts to believe in it. Kamoshida then preys upon An's feelings of inadequacy by spreading rumors that he and An were in a formal and consensual relationship. This effectively forces An to assume the role of the easy airheaded Hafu, lest Kamoshida punish her peers further. There's even one situation in Persona 5 where she goes as far to tell Joker Ryuji to not interfere with Kamoshida's abuse because she fears reprisal. An eventually becomes completely lost and begins to push people away until Joker basically stages an intervention. In the interim, Kamoshida gets Mishima to get Shiho to go to the PE faculty office to do God knows what to her, but whatever happened in there was bad enough for Shiho to want to commit suicide. An feels responsible for not sticking up to Kamoshida earlier and starts to take matters into her own hands. She starts tailing Joker Ryuji to Kamoshida's palace and into the metaverse. Kamoshida's guards then confuse her for Kamoshida's cognition of herself and capture her. Stop the video! Now here's where we get my major gripes with Salari's takes on An. To begin, let's play a couple clips from this video for context.
Shortly after An is captured, we also see Kamoshida's cognition of her, except she's wearing a skimpy swimsuit, cat ears, and exists entirely to dote upon him. This enrages An so much that she finally achieves the power to fight back. The group eventually confronts Kamoshida as the final boss, who has transformed into a grotesque cognition of his real self.
Those of you who have played Persona 5 would have missed the big gap of events that take place within Persona 5 after An awakens her persona and when everyone goes to fight Kamoshida. As a matter of fact, an entire in-game day passes before the player can even venture back in the metaverse to fight Kamoshida. In addition to teaching the player about gearing up before a big boss battle, Persona 5 wisely uses this time to allow An to process what happened to her in the metaverse and to tell the audience, Joker, and Ryuji, and Morgana on what she plans to do with Kamoshida.
Let me help too. I want to make him pay for what happened to Shiho. He just keeps going like nothing happened, even after what he did to her. I'll never forgive him.
The reason why I'm bringing this up is because in Salari's video, he shows footage in his video of himself fighting Kamoshida 7 whole days after An gets her persona. There's some crucial context that's missing here by just glossing it over with eventually we go fight Kamoshida. In Salari's video, it looks like An goes from freeing herself from her bindings to directly fighting Kamoshida when that's actually not the case. This lonely narrative is used to show how much more determined An is. Before her persona awakening, An was seen as a dejected, lonely pushover, but now she's full of fiery conviction, determined to bring Kamoshida to justice. Whether that justice involves killing him or not within the metaverse, An hasn't exactly decided yet. An, and or the narrative, also uses this time to visit Shiho in the hospital off-screen, and I think that through visiting Shiho, An decides that Kamoshida doesn't deserve a quick death. He deserves something much worse in An's eyes. We will get to what exactly this is in just a moment. While this omission of this particular character growth for An really strikes me as pretty dishonest, the next scene Salari omitted really got to me. This scene that Salari omitted made me fall in love with An as a character and solidify the message that I thought Persona 5 was using An as a vehicle to deliver, especially when you take into account her personal life experience as a Hafu living in Japan. Roll the clip that showcases An being a badass female protagonist. Dude, she slices the fuck out of Kamoshida's cognitive image of herself, a projection both of what Japanese society and Kamoshida think that she is. She's not some airheaded gaijin or hafu like so many other people think that she is. She resents being seen as an outcast based on her looks, and is absolutely fed up with Japanese society telling her that her different looks is some form of original sin, something of which she has to atone for. An has been told repeatedly by both her teachers and her peers that she must shed what makes her unique in order to survive as a hafu in Japanese society. It is for this reason that An chose to go after Kamoshida's cognitive image of herself instead of attempting to kill him with her newfound power. An, like Joker, blatantly rejects what Japanese society expects from her by attacking her cognitive image of herself, which is some fucking powerful stuff. But Badger Knight, you haven't talked about the cat suit yet. Well, okay, I'm getting there. Hold on. Before we do that, I need to let a clip from Salari's video to play for context.
As early as Kamoshida's palace, we get an example of the male gaze. When characters in Persona 5 awaken to their powers, or their persona, they undergo a transformation where they're given an outfit which is supposed to represent them. Akira and Ryuji are the first to awaken. Both of them wear outfits designed to show you how cool and tough they are. Prominent angular features and hints that they offer some kind of protection. Anne, however, is bestowed with this as an outfit. Yes, the character who has been objectified by the game's current antagonist is given a skin-tight leather catsuit that accentuates the bust. It also has a zipper, which really has to be uncomfortable, right? Ryuji comments upon how Anne looks by saying,
"But damn!"
And when deciding upon a codename for her, one of the options is Sexy Cat. However, it's a throwaway option as Anne's codename is Panther by default.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, so we're going to start with Salari's criticisms of Joker and Ryuji's outfits and why their personas are relevant to them, then circle back around to Anne to do the same. I find it incredibly weird that Salari glosses over Joker and Ryuji's outfits and relevant personas because they are, quote,
designed to show you how cool and tough they are. Prominent angular features and hints that they offer some kind of protection.
But also within the same video, says this in regards to the game sexualizing Anne.
But I'm not saying that designers shouldn't be allowed to make characters with sex appeal, but context does matter.
If context does indeed matter when talking about character designs, it is dishonest as fuck to gloss over Ryuji and Joker's designs by parroting Sarkeesian's talking points about the male gaze and character designs. Salari, in the same video, goes into great detail about how the design for Shadow Kamoshida is significant and supports his characterization as a creepy scumbag. My question is, why didn't he give Joker on Ryuji's character designs both in and out of the metaverse the same treatment within this video?
The group eventually confronts Kamoshida as the final boss, who has transformed into a grotesque cognition of his real self, Shadow Kamoshida. The arena is adorned with the female statues that we've seen throughout the palace. Along with wearing a crown and a cape, he spawned horns from his head, wielding a glass of wine in one hand and a riding crop in another, a reference to him physically abusing his students. He's also spawned 2 more arms wielding a gold knife and a fork. 2 standout features of this design though is the trophy that's in front of him, in which we see the legs of female students sticking out and writhing around. When he loses a certain amount of his health, he'll take an opportunity to pick up one of these girls with a fork and eat them to heal. The other standout design feature of Shadow Kamoshida is his gigantic white tongue. An interesting aspect of this fight is that Kamoshida has an attack named Lick, and this will always be targeted at Anne, the only female member of your party. As the fight is nearing the end, Shadow Kamoshida summons cognitions of 2 students, Mishima, who I mentioned previously was a victim of Kamoshida's physical abuse, and then Shiho, the student Kamoshida drove to attempt suicide, is brought in to assist him with a special attack. The Persona games have some incredible boss designs, and Kamoshida is no exception. It illustrates this disgusting, lecherous being who abuses his power with no remorse. The world and everything in it exists simply to please him, and young women aren't just objects to him, they provide him sustenance, regardless of their own well-being.
This is an incredibly reductionist way to look at all 3 characters, and doing so misses out on all the subtleties of their respective designs. For those of you familiar with the Persona franchise, know that most of the characters' personas are loosely based on historic and mythological figures. So by glossing over this crucial aspect of the Persona franchise, we lose a lot of subtlety on why Joker, Ryuji, and Anne look and behave the way they do. Let's start with Joker's personas and outfit first, before we move on to Ryuji and then to Anne. Joker's first persona he gets after standing up to Kamoshida at the start of the game is named Arsene. Arsene was created as a character by French detective mystery writer Maurice LeBlanc. Arsene was a thief and an anti-hero who only stole from those he perceived to be morally bankrupt, such as landowners and the rich, who never shared any empathy towards normal people chafing under their extortion. It is implied that LeBlanc based the character of Arsene Lupin off French anarchist Marius Jacob, whose trial made national headlines in 1905. Before Marius Jacob was sentenced to life at hard labor by the French government for stealing, he wrote an essay called Why I'm a Burglar, of which I'm going to take a few quotes from right now. The more a man works, the less he earns. The less he produces, the more he benefits. Merit is not taken into consideration. Only the bold take hold of power and hasten to legalize the rapine. From the bottom of the social scale, everything is but dastardly on one side and idiocy on the other. How do you expect that penetrated with these truths I could have respected such a state of things? A liquor seller and the boss of a brothel enrich themselves, while a man of genius dies of poverty in a hospital bed. The baker who bakes bread doesn't get any. The shoemaker who makes thousands of shoes shows his toes. The weaver who makes stocks of clothing doesn't have any to cover himself with. The bricklayer who builds castles and palaces wants for air in a filthy hovel. Those who produce everything have nothing, and those who produce nothing have everything. As for Arsene's and Joker's outfit, both designs seem to take inspiration from the French Belle Epoque, an era of French history marked by an explosion of art and fashion for France's wealthy class. The Belle Epoque literally translates to the beautiful era in English, and this era lasted from the end of the Franco-Prussian War to around the beginning of World War I. Arsene reflects the style of the Belle Epoque, which is the same era where he was invented by the author LeBlanc. The ways Arsene disguises himself are all markers of wealth. Thieves are not normally the kinds of people who wear top hats or silk after all. While Arsene's well-fitting three-piece suit and hat belies a good taste and a great deal of wealth, the whole package is, in a way, a sarcastic remark toward high society, with a ridiculous chimney-like top hat. The same could be said about Joker's design. Joker lives a double life with his appearance outside the metaverse mostly serving as a deceptive mask to hide someone who is free-spirited, chaotic, and rebellious. While controlling Joker outside the metaverse, he can be seen with his hands in his pockets, slouched over looking at the ground. But as soon as the glasses come off, he's a completely different person. Joker's other persona, Satanel, is a clear reference to the fallen angel Lucifer, who in the famous poetic epic written by John Milton, Paradise Lost, leads a rebellion against God, someone he perceives to be a tyrant. Lucifer's desire to rebel stems from his unwillingness to be subjugated by God, saying that angels like himself are self-begot and self-raised. Lucifer is quoted from the work, famously saying that it is better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. The poem is a powerful meditation on rebellion, longing, and the desire for redemption. So when Persona 5 assigns the rebel angel as a persona to Joker, it is very deliberate. I mean, hell. No pun intended, by the way. If we take this as a literal allusion to Paradise Lost, then Joker in Persona 5 could be leading his own army of rebel angels in a war against their own godly tyrant, being Shido. Joker's rebelling against the status quo throughout the entirety of Persona 5, saying that he himself is self-raised and self-begotten, driven to enact his justice by a corrupt society, which needs an overhaul that is sympathetic to the individual, and not the collective. Speaking of being sympathetic to the individual, I strongly object to how Salari portrayed Ryuji as some sort of sexist asshole in his video when there are legitimate reasons for his behavior. This is no more exemplified than through his part of his video where he glosses over Ryuji's character arc to try and justify his criticisms of An. He's failed to consider, or even mention in the video, that Ryuji might act like a horny idiot all the time because he's literally had no one else to tell him how to act otherwise. He comes from an abusive household where he was taught inadvertently that the only way to solve problems and conflict was through violent action. Throughout his life, he had no decent male role model to look up to. The only people who he could possibly confide in make fun of his injury, i.e. his teammates, and his coach Kamoshida, who broke his leg either through overtraining him or in an actual legit fight. Ryuji might also be the victim of locker room talk. Again, the track team for all intents and purposes for Ryuji is his home away from home, which makes the track team a place where he can have more private conversations with his peers. In Persona 5, Sujin Academy is quite the infamous rumor mill, and most of the students there do practice locker room talk in some capacity or another.
Hey, wasn't that Takamaki?
Rumor has it she's dating Kamoshida.
Seriously?
I heard people saw them in his car together.
You know, she seems pretty easy, huh? You think I'd have a chance too?
Come on, dude. You can't go after Kamoshida's bitch.
I still can't believe that this is an actual line in the game. Anyway, the point being is that locker room talk is often a breeding ground for toxicity, and it's very significant that Ryuji integrates that kind of culture in his personality. One of Ryuji's biggest mistakes was assuming that his teammates were his friends or even his family, as a true friend would have backed him up or even stopped him from retaliating against Kamoshida, even without knowing the full context as to why. The only true friend he's had in his life so far is Joker. When they both go to confront Kamoshida, Ryuji starts to get violent, and Joker, being his level-headed self, stops his friend from incriminating himself further. I should also avoid glossing over that this isn't the first time Ryuji has tried to hit Kamoshida. I mentioned that Kamoshida broke Ryuji's leg a bit earlier, but part of the reason why that happened is Kamoshida wanted to replace Sujin's Academy star track team with his own star volleyball team, and in order to do that, some tragic accident needed to happen to its best runner, if you catch my meaning. Kamoshida overtrained and squeezed the track team for info about Ryuji's life until he got the information he can use to piss off Ryuji, with that information being about his home life. Ryuji's dad was an abusive drunkard who, after coming home, would physically abuse his mom and son until one day he never came home, abandoning his family. Now, Persona 5 doesn't exactly tell us what kind of rumors Kamoshida was spreading about Ryuji, but based on his reaction in home life, we can probably make a few good guesses. Ryuji's home away from home was the track team, something in which he was all by accounts pretty good at. He He likely found some sort of peace and validation through his teammates supporting him at his track meets and such, until Kamoshida started making him look bad. Ryuji then snapped and hit Kamoshida, as Kamoshida himself was probably gaslighting Ryuji for not being strong enough to defend his mother from his father's abuse, then trying to tie that back to Ryuji's poor performance in the track team, which is now under Kamoshida's ridiculous training regimens. As a matter of fact, Ryuji thinking that he's never been strong enough to defend his mother is something that's bothered him his entire life, to the point where he feels like he owes her for all the years he wasn't able to protect her. This is no more exemplified than when Ryuji in middle school asks An for money so he can buy his mom a stuffed dolphin on a school trip, something that's both extremely wholesome and very sad. Ryuji, when he's older and in Persona 5 itself, is seen dropping important tasks, such as helping An train as part of her confidant arc, or at times being straight up not available to hang out due to Ryuji wanting to support his mom. What's especially shitty about Ryuji's situation is that Ryuji is paying for his father's sins by carrying on the legacy of physical abuse his father started with him. Instead of Ryuji's dad bearing the social burdens of his sins against his family, it's Ryuji bearing those stigmas instead. So instead of Ryuji being known as a stalwart defender of the downtrodden and weak, he's known by his peers as a violent and short-tempered individual who got his comeuppance when Kamoshida broke his leg. What's worse is that he's known by his teammates as a traitor who threw away all their hard work and futures by standing up to an objectively evil douchebag. Ryuji's been persecuted his whole life for crimes that he didn't commit due to circumstances beyond his control, and this is perfectly reflected in his persona and historical figure, Captain William Kidd. In real-life history, Captain Kidd was a Scottish privateer who conducted raids by order of the King of England. The Crown promised to defend Kidd's actions so long as he only attacked French ships in the process, until one day, his crew conducted a raid without his permission, sinking a neutral ship in the process. Kidd was considered a traitor and a war criminal at this point, being eventually dragged back to England kicking and screaming to be executed for a crime that he didn't commit. So how is this relevant to Ryuji being a horny idiot in Persona 5? Well, all the hijinks Ryuji puts himself and his friends up to could stem from Ryuji's want of proving that he's not an outcast to both his friends and peers, by showing them he knows his way around other people, especially women.
Ain't gonna wait one damn minute longer. We gotta strike while the iron's hot. Come on, we're gonna go meet some freaking chicks. What are you? Sit down and shut up. Let's go.
Bless you, Ryuji. Thank you.
You're a little confused, but he got the spirit.
After all, he ropes Joker into hiring Kawakami, a maid, and then ropes both of them again into chasing some tail in Hawaii and at home. Ryuji, when in Hawaii and at home in Japan, makes a goal for himself, Joker, Mishima, and Yusuke to pick up some girls, but he strikes it with almost everyone he talks to. In my opinion, the anime does a far better job at depicting the differentiates between Ryuji and Joker's attitude towards women, at least as far as Hawaii goes. In the game, Joker just kinda goes along with Ryuji, and there's no dialogue to accompany the boys as they strike out. Considering the actions of both characters within the anime, we get quite the feminist message if I do say so myself. Ryuji, in his relentless pursuit of women, strikes out with everyone that he talks to. Joker, by choosing not to participate in Ryuji's escapades in the anime, is actually able to help Hifumi, who is the subject of the same kind of relentless pursuits that Ryuji roped Yusuke into. Also, to Joker's credit, he doesn't ask for Hifumi's number or expect some kind of reward like Ryuji does.
I'm not sure how to thank you properly, but I truly appreciate what you did back there.
Take care, Kay.
Damn it! I struck out with every single girl. Who was that? What the hell, Ren? I thought you weren't about this. That looks like that fishy's swimming away.
Joker earns Hifumi's respect and gratitude just by being a decent person, and not just by relentlessly pursuing her like Ryuji does. Hifumi also just does an about-face and walk away from Joker. She stops, turns back around to look at him, and then walks off with a smile. If I had to guess, Hifumi's probably impressed with Joker's quick wits, maturity, and humble nature, a stark contrast to Ryuji and the Americans harassing her. Joker possesses this sort of cool, calm, and collected demeanor about him, which to others might come off as maturity. I mean, hell, if we take in Kawakami's whole arc into account, Kawakami within the game is constantly trying to recapture her youth, as seen by her trying on various swimsuits at the hotel, or in her romance subplot, where she says that for the first time in a while, she's craving a beer, and kinda whines about how drinking on the beach is illegal in Hawaii. If we take these comparisons of maturity in stride, and apply them to all scenes where Ryuji's in, then we are left with one logical conclusion in regards to Ryuji being a horny idiot throughout the entirety of Persona 5. We're looking at Ryuji as an immature punk rocker down to his luck who has been bullied, abused, and betrayed by his best friends and teachers, so he tries to compensate for his inadequacies through doing what he perceives to be masculine, i.e. resorting to physical violence and relentlessly picking up women. It's almost as if there's a term for that. Yes.
You never see it coming.
Guys, this is why I am so gung-ho in analyzing media in all of its aspects in every single video that I upload. Persona 5 lifts inspiration from multiple different sources and then applies those concepts to its cast of brilliant written characters who then, in turn, are used to directly commentate upon Japanese society. It is impossible, if not unethical, to boil down and then analyze all of Persona 5's messages and aspects to a single reductionist perspective, i.e. the male gaze. But them angular features, though! Okay, now we could talk about An's catsuit and the significance of her various personas. Again, oversimplifying and glossing over the fucking iceberg that is Persona 5, Salari has also failed to mention the aspects of Ann's persona reflect the true feelings of her rebellious self. Carmen, Ann's persona, is inspired by a character of the same name created by French writer Prosper Mérimée, who wrote a novel in the same name. Mérimée, while famous for inventing the character of Carmen, and partly being responsible for inventing the concept of the novella, was also a noted archaeologist and historian who decided to preserve many French historic sites, such as the medieval citadel of Carcassonne and the Notre Dame Cathedral. Mérimée and his predecessor were spurred by the actions of French revolutionaries who destroyed most of his country's national monuments in the French Revolution because they were seen as problematic holdovers from King Louis's reign. Of the 300 churches built in Paris in the 16th century, only 97 were left standing in 1800, with the rest being converted into barns or cafes. It could be said that Mérimée wanted France to own up to its problematic history instead of destroying it to fit the new norm. Does that sound like someone that we know exists within Persona 5? Now, while I wager not many of you have read the novella itself about Carmen, everyone has heard the opera, and if I confuse you with that sentence, take a listen. Now you learn something new every day, huh? Whatever the version, opera or novella, Carmen is generally depicted as a classic femme fatale who would take advantage of her beauty and charm to make men fall for her, but quickly break the relationship off when she's bored of her wooer. Much like Anne herself, Carmen in the play is depicted as being a foreigner in her own land. Carmen in the opera is a gypsy who lives in southern Spain. The word gypsy is considered to be pejorative due to its connotations of illegality and irregularity. This would mean that Anne and Carmen are kindred spirits in this regard, so it's no accident that Anne's persona is Carmen incarnate. Carmen, the persona not the opera character, then evolves into Celestine, a persona based on Celestine Gallimarie, an opera singer famous for her role of Carmen. The back of Celestine's jacket in Persona 5 reads the following, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Anyway, the point being is that this is a lyric sung by Carmen herself from the opera, from the duet song Si es toi, si es moi. The phrase translates to, free she was born, free she will die. In the song, Carmen exclaims that she refuses to be bound by any man, but is killed by her spurned ex-lover Jose in doing so. In the first act of the opera, there's another allusion to the relationship between Anne and Carmen. In the first act of the play, the police learn that Carmen has attacked a woman with a knife. When challenged, Carmen answers with mocking defiance, saying, tra-la-la-la-la, cut me, burn me. Basically, Carmen is telling these cops to go get bent. The captain of the guard orders a character named Jose to tie her hands while he prepares the prison warrant. Carmen beguiles him by dancing and singing about a night of passion with her ex-lover. Confused, yet mesmerized, Jose eventually agrees to free her hands. As she is led away and out of the prison, Carmen pushes her escort to the ground and runs off laughing. Jose is then arrested for dereliction of duty. Before Anne awakens her persona, she has a moment in the game where she almost gives in to Kamoshida's demands, rationalizing it as her punishment for her dereliction of duty, wanting to protect Shiho by flirting with Kamoshida. Joker then questions her on why she will want that. Then Anne tells Kamoshida to get bent, and then she busts out of her irons much like Carmen does. Ergo, Watashi o kite mayusu. Now what I think is going on here is that Persona 5 might be depicting Carmen as a ghostly and vengeful spirit who has had time to reflect on her death within the opera. This is why Carmen says this to Anne when she's awakened.
My, it's taken far too long. Tell me, who is going to avenge him if you don't? Forgiving him was never the option. Such is the scream of the other you that dwells in me. There you go. Nothing can be solved by restraining yourself. Understand? Then I'll gladly lend you my strength.
Carmen is telling Anne that she isn't sorry for her promiscuous behavior or being objectified based on her looks. She isn't sorry for living her life and doing what made herself personally happy. If anything, Carmen's pissed that someone stopped her from living a full life. Upon awakening, Anne adopts Carmen's attitude as well and starts living for herself, shedding all the labels society has placed upon her, such as airhead, Kamoshida's bitch, flashy female student, Miss Old Dude Charmer, and the slutty little kid woman in red, but most of all, Hafu. This powerful message is beautifully reflected with Anne's catsuit, something that allows Anne to be unique within a collectivist society. Now you might be saying that if Anne is portrayed as this confident badass that leans on fiction to support her characterization within Persona 5, then why does she act confused when she notices she's wearing a catsuit after first unlocking her persona? Why doesn't the game attempt to justify Anne's catsuit before she goes in the metaverse, or bother setting up the seductress aspect of her character? Well, I think that's for a few reasons. The easiest explanation is that Joker and Ryuji are literally on a time limit. If they don't defeat Kamoshida soon, they will literally get expelled and the game's over. Then from a gameplay standpoint, Persona 5 literally does not have time for exposition. From a narrative standpoint, Anne herself still thinks that her looks are something to be ashamed of, despite whatever her rebellious spirit may depict in the metaverse. After all, she's been bullied most of her life based on her looks. It's going to take an equal amount of time for Anne to realize that she in fact matters. That sticking out like a sore thumb, as it were, is a strength rather than a weakness. Anne, also during the interim of her unlocking her persona, is intensely focused on seeking vengeance on Kamoshida, to the point where the player cannot get to know her better until the conflict is resolved. Just earlier, I called this decision wise, as it allows Anne to breathe a little bit within the plot before she starts on the path of self-actualization. Her first roadblock to overcome is choosing what type of justice to enact on Kamoshida. Does she want to kill them outright, or does she want to do something completely different? The former might have been true at some point, but as made clear by the end of how she deals with Kamoshida at the end of the boss fight, it's clear that she might have changed her mind about forcing him to jump off the balcony of his castle at some point. While Jarko prepares for the boss fight with Shadow Kamoshida, An takes some time to visit Shiho in the hospital a few times. Perhaps on one of these visits she spent looking at her broken and unconscious friend, An thinks that making Kamoshida parallel Shiho's suicide attempt isn't the type of irony that she's into. But oh, An thinks of something so much worse. An is into a completely different but also similar type of dramatic irony, the type that she's somewhat familiar with. An wants Kamoshida to bear the labels that come with being a sexual predator, labels that would certainly stick with him for the rest of his life, especially in collectivist Japanese society. An also wanting Kamoshida to confess to his crimes rather than straight up kill him might stem from her experience as a Hafu. If we relate Kamoshida's fate back to An's, it makes sense that An will want Kamoshida to bear some amount of social burden like she has her entire life.
I was surprised you could hold yourself back against Kamoshida's shadow.
It wasn't like that. I just wanted Kamoshida to apologize himself.
You're so kind, Lady An.
No matter how much of a shitbag he was, finishing him off would have left a bad aftertaste, huh?
Huh? That's not it. I think revenge is better served if I make him repent. Realizing what he's done, he'll grovel for forgiveness the rest of his life, you know? I just believe there are fates worse than death.
Holy shit.
Everyone then apologizes to An, and while it seems like everyone starts to heal from Kamoshida's confession, An says something strange. An apologizes to the people who perpetrated the rumors about her and Kamoshida. Wait, why is she apologizing to the people who caused her suffering? Is she just doing this to be polite, or are some other feelings being alluded to? I'm going to answer these questions by delving into An's confidant arc, but before we do that, I need to let a clip from Salari's video play once again for context.
Ryuji comments upon how An looks by saying,
"But damn!"
And when deciding upon a codename for her, one of the options is Sexy Cat. However, it's a throwaway option as Anne's codename is Panther by default.
This is another instance of Salari being somewhat disingenuous in analyzing Persona 5's more problematic aspects. Salari showcases An's reaction to the player picking the dialogue option that's a bit more racy and subjective than the other ones, but also admits the fact that if the player picks any of the other dialogue options, An has the same reaction. She hates all the other codenames the Joker suggests equally.
Is that what you're going to call me from now on? I am so not down with this.
Salari also omits some dialogue where An herself elaborates on why she detests these nicknames shortly before deciding on her codename. An, since unlocking her persona, doesn't want to be called something that makes her look small and sound small. She wants to be known by something that's a bit more aggressive, loud, boisterous, and ferocious.
Maybe... Panther?
This is something that Carmen, An's persona, implies in her awakening cutscene, that nothing can be resolved by restraining herself, and that An should lose the tamer aspects of herself to avenge Shiho. There's also the implication that An might not want to be called anything to do with the word cat, due to how her cognitive image was depicted in Kamoshida's palace with those stupid pink cat ears of hers. We'll talk more about Carmen and An's appearance in just a few minutes, but An's reasons for not wanting to be called certain things are definitely justifiable considering previous story beats. Also, if Salari's concerned about a JRPG including a dialogue option that's a bit tone-deaf and childish as opposed to the other two, then you could just pick one of the other two. Crazy, right? To Salari's credit, he does mention that this bit of dialogue is indeed a throwaway option, and that this decision mostly is done for flavor, but admitting that An reacts the same regardless of what you pick makes his criticisms of this aspect of the game a little less valuable. Perhaps he's implying this by saying that An's codename is Panther regardless, but ideally, I shouldn't be confused about what he's trying to say. Anyway, before we go any further, we have to let Salari talk for another couple minutes for some more context.
I also want to mention that outside of school and fighting Freudian foes, An is a part-time model. The game makes it clear that An is an attractive young woman that catches the eyes of many people, and she's aware of it too. She understands that beauty has value and wants to develop a career in which she can make money from her genetic blessings. There are many arguments within feminist theory that claim modeling in itself is a form of exploitation, that much like the rest of media it's subject to the male gaze, and the choice of models and fashion that they wear are chosen to appeal to men. Some claim that it's empowering, in that giving women a platform in which they can influence culture moves the power balance closer to their favor. But you could also argue that in a society that's dominated by the patriarchy, women may have to lie to themselves that they're reclaiming their sexuality in order to more comfortably pander to the male gaze, which is honestly a super depressing take, and personally I don't subscribe to it. An has chosen this path. She decided that she is fine with the world admiring her for her beauty, and she knows how people see her. I'm sure that some people would argue that because Anne is accepting of the world seeing her as a beautiful person, then we as an audience shouldn't see it as a problem when the game does so too. The problem here though is that when the game objectifies her, it's done to titillate the audience. It's good that the game highlighted how reprehensible it is when people in power like Kamoshida abuse their power and exploit women for their own gain. How he sees them than little else than their bodies, but that message is unfortunately undercut when the game contains a beach scene. A staple scene within anime includes close-up shots of Anne's butt and breasts. You can also excuse it by saying that this is supposed to be how the boys in the game see her, but that would still be abiding by the male gaze, and more importantly, the scene hasn't been created for the boys. Anne hasn't been created for them either. They've been created for us, the audience.
Something that Salari omits from this video are the events that occur between the beach scene and Ann's persona awakening, as well as the reasons why Ann becomes a model. While Minute of the Week where Ann has a bit of subtle character growth in visiting Shiho in the hospital is a little annoying, skipping right over the parts of Persona 5 where we get more party members such as Yusuke, Makoto, and Futaba is dishonest at the very least. However, for the purpose of this video, it is crucial to understand that Ann gets some crucial character development in her confidant and romance arc with Joker. I'm mentioning this because the beach scene can only happen in the summer and only if you've recruited all your party members by August 29th. It is possible for the player to complete Ann's confidant arc and lock in a romance with her as early as June, and possibly even earlier if you speedrun it. Glossing over this crucial bit of plot information to jump right to the beach scene so Salari can talk about the male gaze and Ann's bikini is incredibly dishonest and fucking crazy. But Badger Knight, what about the beach scene in Le Male Gaze? Certainly there isn't any way you can defend this kind of blatant misogyny. Well, actually I can, but in order to do so, we have to understand the healthy amount of character growth Ann experiences as part of her confidant arc with Joker, where she sorts out all of her personal issues and becomes self-actualized by the time the beach scene happens within Persona 5. To start Ann's confidant arc, Joker first has to speak to her sometime after Kamoshida's confession. Ann seems troubled about something, but due to Japanese society teaching her that she shouldn't be a burden upon others, she feels like she cannot share her problems with others. Joker obviously insists and says fuck that and takes her out to dinner. Through this first conversation with Ann, we can glean that her attitude hasn't exactly changed from the start of the game, and while Kamoshida has been dealt with, Ann hasn't exactly healed yet. She feels guilty for not stepping in sooner to stop Kamoshida from hurting Shiho, and this is what will drive Ann to be her best for the rest of the game. Ann will spend the rest of the game healing through guilt and wanting to be a better person for Shiho's sake. Please remember that when Ann first moved to Japan, she was ostracized based on her looks until her empathetic queen, Shiho, stepped in to befriend her, whom, by the way, despite being literally and physically crippled by Kamoshida's abuse, apologizes to Ann for not being strong enough to tell her about all the horrible things Kamoshida was doing to her. Shiho, even when bedridden and fading in and out of consciousness, still cares about other people's feelings when she has every right to be angry with Ann for not protecting her more. Shiho is truly a rarity and must be protected at all costs. I joke, but this is exactly what Ann does within her confidant arc. Ann feels like that she's failed her one and only best friend that's always been there for her throughout her entire life. So, she feels like she has to repay all her years of kindness and empathy by being a strong and exemplary individual. Basically, our resident Hafu wants to take all the derogatory labels both her peers and society have placed upon her and reclaim them for her own. She wants to take them all in stride and become stronger for it. She tells Joker that she doesn't know how to do this, but she'll think of something, and as luck would have it, she does. In the next confidant link conversation, Joker and Ann both go to a park where Ann tells us that she's come up with a way to make herself stronger. Ann essentially wants Joker to test the old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, by having Joker hurl as many insults at her as possible to see if she gets fazed by any of them. Joker tries out several insults, such as Airhead, and even trying to catch Ann off guard by saying he loves her, and eventually they both realize that this isn't exactly going to work. Ann then tells us about her parents and her modeling career. I already touched upon this and we might circle back to this later, but the important thing to note here is that Ann mentions taking a liking to a certain female villainess in one of her favorite anime that she'd like to watch as a child. Ann at a young age identified with this villainess and her sincere sense of justice, admiring this character for her natural beauty, strength, and sexiness. Little Ann was so inspired by this fictional character that she wanted to grow up to be just like her someday. So who was this character that Ann identified with? Well, after doing some of my own research, it's clear that Atlas is once again drawing on Maurice LeBlanc's cast of characters. Earlier, I said that LeBlanc's character, Arsene Lupin, was the inspiration for Joker's true persona, but it also seems that LeBlanc was the inspiration for this anime character called Fujiko Mine. This character wasn't included in LeBlanc's stories, but rather she was created when Japan's senior animation studio, Tokyo Movie Shinza, and late veteran animator Monkey Punch adapted LeBlanc's novels for anime and manga. The anime takes place 3 generations after LeBlanc's novels, and follows Lupin's French-Japanese grandson as he carries on the family tradition of stealing from the rich while dressed in silk. The Lupin III franchise is insanely popular in Japan to the point where it's constantly referenced or name-dropped in almost every single piece of Japanese media without context, as the references are almost universally understood. It'd be like if someone in the West dropped a reference to a Spielberg movie or referenced Star Wars in their movie or game. It'd be universally understood here. As a matter of fact, Persona 5 has many blatant references to Lupin III, with Joker being Lupin incarnate, as per the name of his persona, Ann's catsuit referencing Fujiko's catsuit that she wears on heists, and Yusuke's Phantom Thieves outfit and persona's name, referencing the samurai character of Goemon. The studio also thought it prudent to include a female rival in the series to Lupin named Fujiko Mine, to add more of a female perspective to the anime. While Fujiko isn't part of Lupin's gang, she often works with them or tries to beat them to a prize within a heist. Her principal tactic is to stick with Lupin and company and then double-cross them right as their goal is in sight. Frequently, she finds it necessary to betray Lupin to get close to the enemy, then after ingraining herself in his trust, she will acquire the goods and escape laughing at him. Sound familiar? When not with Lupin and company, she's not above using her feminine charms when necessary to complete a job, and has kissed and even slept with different men for information or to escape a situation. She also, like An Takamaki of Persona 5 fame, is sometimes depicted as wearing a catsuit when on a heist. So, yeah. An's character design is a clear and obvious nod to this particular character in anime. I also should mention the scene that occurs with Yusuke and An, with how it's relevant to Fujiko and the Lupin the Third franchise.
You think so?
For context, the Phantom Thieves need to get inside Yusuke's studio to find the entrance to a palace, and they need a distraction to do so. This is where An comes in as part of the heist. She's meant to distract Yusuke while Joker and Ryuji sneaking quietly through the crack in the door by being his model. This distraction comes on the part of An modeling for a new painting for Yusuke, something that Ryuji's at fault for by getting violent towards Yusuke. An obviously doesn't want to be objectified due to her abuse at Kamoshida's hands, but due to Yusuke assuming that An understands that his interest in her is purely for art, this comes off as a giant misunderstanding.
Phew, that was tight.
Tight? No, I'm doing this for art.
Thoughts are temporary, art is forever! Yusuke, 2016 probably. Now you might go, Badger Knight, the male gaze says that writers could have come up with Phantom Thieves breaking into the studio another way. To which I will say, sure. But again, this reductionist point of view discounts the several things that Yusuke doesn't know about An at this present time in the plot. To Yusuke's credit, he doesn't know that An was the primary victim of Kamoshida's abuse, and it's also very unlikely that An would tell him that she was so. I also don't imagine victims of sexual assault go around telling random strangers and business partners about that kind of experience. Exposing herself would also likely ruin the chance that the Phantom Thieves have at sneaking in the studio and finding the entrance to Madarami's palace by earning Yusuke's sympathy. If you're going to say that Yusuke is a perv, then that interpretation would also fall flat based on the evidence in the plot.
Stop making such odd assumptions. I have absolutely no interest in her as someone of the opposite sex.
To Yusuke's credit, he's also trying to be modest by attempting to imagine An nude. It's also likely that Yusuke couldn't bring himself to tell An what the actual turns were for the portrait, because he's written to be very socially awkward.
Oh, I think I cracked my ass.
An, are you alright? Is yours cracked as well?
Of course not!
He also wants to paint An out of legitimate and professional artistic interest, which is something that the plot reinforces multiple times.
It might make for a better picture if I can brighten my model's mood. She may even be willing to try out various expressive poses for use in a dynamic composition.
What kind of poses?
I mean, for fuck's sake, he uses the last of his money to buy a pair of lobsters because he thought they were aesthetically pleasing.
I haven't had my very core shaken as vigorously as this since the first time An entered my gaze.
This leads us to the point in the plot where Atlas makes a pretty sick reference to Fujiko's character by having An play the part of the femme fatale on a heist to distract and befuddle Yusuke. An shows up to Yusuke's studio by wearing a ridiculous amount of clothes, to which she gradually takes off and throws towards Yusuke, all while making some suggestive comments.
Do you think we could do this somewhere else then? A little more atmosphere would be lovely.
This should be good enough.
But wouldn't a room with a lock be a bit better?
A lock?
Must a girl say more?
An is clearly pulling on her childhood hero here for inspiration. That much is clear.
Lady An, you have to act. Get back in character.
Let's go. I was just starting to get in the mood.
While you still might be going, but Badger Knight, the male gaze is still present because this anime is old, and therefore is very unprogressive and represents women poorly. To which I will say, I ain't done yet, you decrepit omelet! The Lupin of the Third series was so successful that in 2012, the studio wanted to make a series that expanded upon the anime's cast of characters within their own standalone series, as part of a 45-year-old anniversary present to its fans. Fujiko got this treatment in the form of a 13-part animated series titled The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, where she's largely the focus of the series as its protagonist. While characters like the Samurai Goemon and Lupin show up, this series largely serves as both a prequel to the original series Monkey Punch penned and animated, as well as a means to flesh out Fujiko's character, which this series does to great effect. This series gives Fujiko an extensive backstory filled with sexual abuse, and rescuing those who are also victims of sexual abuse. While I can't show most of the show on YouTube because of the show's racy content, I can say that one of the episodes is extremely relevant to An's troubled history with Kamoshida and Persona 5. In the second episode of the series, Fujiko becomes the property of a female casino owner, who then takes advantage of her and forces her into a life of crime as a thief and contract killer for reasons I will not get into because of spoilers. Seriously, go watch this anime, it's worth your time. Since Funimation lost the license to sell the anime as part of a Blu-ray box set a few years ago, the only way you can watch it is on Amazon Prime Video, at least here in America. The release of this anime also lines up with An being a younger girl in middle school. According to the Persona 5 wiki, she was born in 1999, so at the time of this anime's release, An would have been 13 in 2012 and living alone in Japan at this point. This would also probably explain how she could get away with watching anime meant for more mature audiences. Now, I'm about to blow everyone's mind, but first, I have to let Salari speak for a second.
There's been some strides in recent years when it comes to giving creators from various backgrounds a voice, but in Japan, where Persona 5 was produced, that growth has been insignificant.
Drumroll please. For this 13-episode spin-off, the creative control wasn't given to some thirsty dude who wanted Fujiko to fill a Bond girl role. This series was written and directed by 2 Japanese women who were given full creative control over this project. Yes, that's right. This series was actually directed by Sayo Yamamoto and written by Mario Koda, both of which were given full creative control of the backgrounds of one of the key characters of a franchise that was, at this point, over 45 years old, with this 13-part anime being an anniversary present to longtime fans of the Lupin franchise. Unlike some characters in the West that are passed between writers, these two didn't got what make Fujiko interesting, such as her sex appeal, and instead doubled down on it by heavily implying that she's both into men and women. Or at least until she gets what he wants from them using her feminine charms. Quite obviously, Yamamoto and Okoda were clearly fans of the franchise, and seemed to want to do Fujiko some amount of justice. And by all accounts, they did. They won the Rookie Award at the 16th Japan Mayday Arts Festival. Female writer, Yamamoto, wanted to use the original Lupin 3 manga and its adult themes as a basis for the series, wanted to capture the, quote, sensuality present in Monkey Punch's original Lupin 3 manga in its, quote, daring interpretation of the franchise. Yamamoto even requested that all the characters be designed and animated in the style of Monkey Punch's manga. Yamamoto and Okoda's depiction of Fujiko also saw some acclaim and controversy in the West because, say it with me now,
it objectifies women too much.
Rebecca Silverman of Anime News Network wrote a mostly positive review of the anime. The only negative aspects she wrote about in her review were the series' odd title opening and the amount of unjustified nudity. However, one of Silverman's colleagues at Anime News Network, Jacob Hope Chapman, disagreed with her assessments of the anime, saying, and I quote, "I cannot, in good conscience, warn people away from the series because of the heaps of sexual content. All the sensationalist, and yes, sometimes disturbing sexual content, is 100% in line with the show's aesthetic and never seems excessive or ill-fitting. This is a show for mature audiences, and surprisingly, Fujiko's constant objectification culminates in one of the most feminist positive anime to come around in years. Now, I absolutely think that this anime character is part of An's metaverse catsuit, which is probably what her inner suit depicts as a true rebellious form. I find it incredibly interesting that Salari finds An's character design problematic when lately the media has been all about diversity and sexual tolerance, especially towards minority groups and women. If anything, An is a symptom of this new message that the modern media seems to be keen on pushing, a message that's supposed to be inherently empowering towards women. Why is An identifying with a powerful, smart, sexy woman an issue? But okay, let's back this up for a second. Salari's of the opinion that because of the male gaze, that women in anime are overly objectified, and the creators who try to push objectification through story beats are no better than those who throw in blatant fan service. From the male gaze's point of view, all anime is problematic in regards to women. But yet, here is An, several years later as a young woman taking inspiration from this problematic media form that should be, by all accounts, harmful to her self-image per feminist film theory. Even as a young girl, An was so inspired by this fictional character that she ingrained it into her own self-identity. This is why An in the metaverse is depicted in a catsuit. Her true self-image is that of which she perceives to be raw strength and power. If her Phantom Thief's catsuit is inspired by French opera writers and female anime artists who write stories about women using their looks to achieve their goals, then her titillating design is completely justified, and I don't see an issue with it. To top this segment off, we have to touch on what An tells Joker after the two part ways from the park. She calls him up on his phone and tells Joker that upon remembering why this character was so inspiring to her, she started strutting home like a model might do on a runway. An then tells Joker that she noticed a young girl trying to mimic her movements. So essentially, An as a young girl gets inspired by an attractive anime character, who then goes on to inspire some random Japanese girl in the streets of Tokyo, who also thinks of An as this beautiful and powerful human being. That's a powerful message, especially considering An's experience as a Hafu. It's all the more commendable for An to use her foreign looks to inspire a young girl who lives in a society that will eventually value her as part of the collective and not as an individual. I'm not saying that An strutting down the streets of Tokyo will single-handedly defeat Japanese collectivism, but it is a decent start. After all, the biggest avalanches are often caused by the smallest voices. In the next confidant conversation with An, she tells Joker that one of the many reasons she was inspired by Fujiko was that, despite being beautiful, she'll never let anyone get under her skin. Time after time, villains seeking world domination get beaten by the heroes, but An is inspired by that kind of drive. According to An, she never really had any goals in her life due to being dragged around by her parents. She would just go home, watch anime, watch TV, eat chips, and then fall asleep. Relatable. But after dealing with Kamoshida and getting motivated to be a better person, she decides she's going to shoot for the stars. On's future goal is to be a star in an action movie, and quickly realizes that she needs to prepare both emotionally and physically for any and all future roles. On tells Shiho of her new plans, and then heads off. The next conversation again builds upon On's determination. Before heading to film for a model shoot, On wants to stop for some crepes, but with Joker's help, On does not. Joker's clearly being a good friend here. He knows what On wants and how he can help her better herself. This means that Joker needs to help On check her impulses and discipline herself into becoming a better person. So that means no sweets. This is also the start of On beginning to take her modeling career a bit more seriously, and where she meets her narrative foil, Mika. In the next few conversations, On and Mika go head to head, in which Mika tries hard to get under On's skin, and she does for the most part. Mika does this by mostly using her feminine charms to propel her modeling career forward, stepping on everyone who gets in her way. This includes people like On, who is obviously older and more experienced than she is, hence why Mika calls her senpai. However, all this respect Mika shows towards On is all amassed to gain her trust, as she quickly betrays On so she can have all the spotlight to herself. This sounds pretty familiar. Obviously, this betrayal makes On pretty mad. But thanks to Shiho being the empathetic queen that she is, she helps On get over it, and she forgets the reasons why she was angry in the first place. Okay, slight break here. Shiho is just awesome. I mean, the girl's in immense physical pain and can barely walk, so it's all the more significant that she laughs at Mika's posturing and fake tears.
We must protect!
On rationalizes that her problems are nothing compared to Shiho's, and feels weak for getting emotional over Mika teasing her. On realizes that true strength is more than getting fazed by hurtful words. It is the power to fight through adversity. Raw strength is nothing compared to the power of one's will. And she now knows that the only power that she needs is herself. But where do we go from here? On's conflict with Mika comes to a head at the Skytree photo shoot, where Mika calls On an airheaded amateur for not taking her career seriously as she possibly could. From Mika's point of view, On has relied on her connections and her natural beauty to get ahead in her career without even trying that hard. Mika has now made this personal by using an insult similar to the ones On's peers at Sujin used to hurl at her. It's at this point where On's confidant arc has a bit of a climax moment. By insulting On, Mika has made this conflict very personal. Now, something I want to touch on really quick is that Salari also implies within this video that On takes her career very seriously, that she's fine with using her genetic blessings for monetary gain, when it's actually the opposite. On has never taken her modeling career seriously to the degree that, say, Mika does. It's something that she does more so as a hobby. In fact, part of the reason why On bothers to do modeling as a part-time job is that she uses it as a means to connect back to her parents while they're away, and because it's the only thing that she's good at by default on account of her good looks. As far as On is concerned, she's an attractive one-trick pony, and even if she was good at something else, she hadn't had the chance to try on account of her peers discriminating against her. As a matter of fact, the reason why Shiho and On became friends in the first place is because On couldn't paint to save her life. It wasn't up until this point in the plot that she decided to take her career seriously, to prove to herself, Mika, and Shiho that she can do anything if she bothers to put her mind to it. This puts On in the unique position to want to prove that she's a better model than Mika, also proving to herself that she's grown as a person. And in order to beat Mika at her own game, she needs to be as physically and emotionally disciplined as she is. This means no more double chocolate crepes, a rigorous diet, and for the first time in her life, heading to the gym to tone up with Joker and Ryuji. This also goes hand in hand with the lessons On is learning about perseverance from Shiho. When she gets to the gym, On says that she wants to, quote, break the first machine that she touches. She also said that having Ryuji bring up Mika during her workout motivated her and allowed her to learn a new lesson in regards to Shiho's perseverance. On now understands that her presence at Shiho's physical therapy sessions are the only thing keeping Shiho from giving up. Much like how Mika motivated On to take her modeling career seriously, On motivates Shiho to take her physical therapy sessions seriously. This all comes to a head for On and Shiho in her 9th confidant conversation, which contains some powerful stuff. Shiho, Joker, and On come back to the roof of Sujin Academy, to the place where Shiho tried to take her own life. As Shiho looks off the side of the building, she thanks On for being a true friend and an inspiration to her. On's efforts to be a driven, strong, cool, and exceptional human being and model have inspired Shiho to heal herself through some esoteric surgery. On helped her best friend discover that she had the power to heal herself after all, removing all disambiguous doubts that Shiho quite literally states came from a different Shiho, a different person that wanted her to die. Shiho wanted to come back to the roof of Sujin Academy to see if her other self would show up, to which she proudly declares that her other self didn't show up this time, that she doesn't exist anymore, and that's partly due to On inspiring her. Due to On's efforts to better herself, Shiho couldn't in good conscience resign herself to rot in some hospital bed. In the context of the narrative, Shiho has decided to transfer to a different school, partly due to wanting to avoid being part of Sujin's infamous and toxic rumor mill. On is worried that both herself and Shiho will once again return to being the lonely people that they once were in middle school and then in high school, so On makes her best friend a promise. On promises to continue her modeling career so that every time Shiho looks at a magazine, turns on a TV, or if On's lofty dreams of becoming an actress do come true, Shiho will see her best friend on the silver screen. On, with this new platform, wants to use this experience with Shiho to use her platform as a model, exclusively to spread the good stuff, using her words. Now, I'm going to assume that this good stuff On wants to spread is going to be On using a platform as a model to spread some positive messages about the importance of inner strength by being an example of a woman who has experienced trauma, sexual abuse, bullying, and discrimination as a hafu living in Japan. This all culminates with the final duel with Mika in the ultimate model shootout, a self-actualized Anne versus Mika, a model who has deceived others into getting where she is now. So, who's the victor for this model shootout? On gets called on to be the focus of this particular shoot. She did it. She achieved her goals through hard work and determination when everything else was stacked against her. An reflects on this by thanking Joker for motivating her, and in her next confidant conversation aboard the Ferris wheel, An realizes how rare and special relationships like the one she has with Joker and Shiho are, and should treasure them. An then reaffirms to the audience and to Joker what her goals are, that she wants to help people, and that she's, quote,
I'm not going to run away anymore. I'll face myself head on. This time, it's my turn to help someone.
Almost a push forward, being a beacon of hope to everyone. And the awesome part about this particular character growth is that she's secure enough in her dreams to offer others like Joker help when they need it. This is very significant. An, the victim of relentless bullying and sexual assault, believes that she is now strong enough to help Joker, the guy who is responsible for helping her reach self-actualization in the first place. This is character growth, indicative of a three-dimensional character with thoughts, feelings, and power of her own. Bravo, An. Excellent job. This leads us to the controversial beach scene, where An at this point in the story is completely self-actualized. She is an exemplary woman who has inspired others to be better. She's well-disciplined, physically fit, and has grown some thick skin by learning to draw on her inner strengths and not allowing others to bother her. A resident Hafu, An Takamaki, is no longer ashamed of who or what she is within the context of Japanese society. An has fully owned up to what makes her unique. So, guess what she does when Ryuji starts oogling her at the beach? Someone who's been doing this throughout the entirety of the game.
Got a better opinion of me now? What? Cat got your tongue? Come on.
She laughs at him and teases him. Now, I know I spent a lengthy section in this video defending Ryuji's pervy actions as a victim of toxic masculinity, but I think the following interpretation is still valid on a subtextual level. Here we go. An, who has spent the entirety of Persona 5 learning how to cope with Kamoshida's abuse, and other labels that have been thrown at her as a Hafu, laughs directly in the face of Persona 5's avatar of toxic masculinity. An then calls Ryuji on his bullshit, who then proceeds to act normally. That is some character growth for both Ryuji and An. Ryuji, while not being completely mature yet, has a tasty helping of humble pie throughout the entirety of the game, partly with Joker's help, with his final blow from An on the beach being the cherry on top. If the writers really wanted to ham up Ryuji being a perv here in this shot, then he would have been depicted looking respectfully at An as she hangs on his shoulders. Instead, they chose to depict Ryuji looking pretty deflated and miserable. An is now secure with her looks, and this is why she calls Ryuji's bluffs by laughing at him.
Even a storyline between her and Kamoshida remained intact, then it would help recontextualize her character. It would mean that how she looks represents who she is, and give her autonomy and full ownership over her appearance, rather than part of her existing to titillate the audience. She would have still been a product of the male gaze, that's unavoidable, but she also would have been a very well-written character with thoughts, feelings, and power, and by objectifying her, what we do in essence is remove some of her power and pass it over to the audience instead.
Salari doesn't consider An to be a three-dimensional character with thoughts and feelings because the male gaze says that she literally cannot be one because the game objectifies her. So all the character growth she went through post her Persona Awakening should be discarded wholesale because she's in a catsuit as if it didn't matter? What the fuck? There comes a time in all forms of media consumption where you're so utterly bewildered by an event taking place that there's so many things wrong with a particular take that you don't have words and you simply just move on with the rest of the video. This is just blatantly both untrue and unfair for Salari to insinuate that An isn't a three-dimensional character by saying that An doesn't have any thoughts and feelings because she's objectified. That's totally ridiculous. As a matter of fact, I can think of several instances where An displayed shitloads of emotional intelligence that she both explicitly and implicitly expresses within the game. The most obvious example that comes to my mind exists within her romance subplot in vanilla Persona 5. After roaming the streets of Tokyo, An and Joker decide to come back to LeBlanc after failing to find a better place to spend Christmas Eve together. The couple then heads up to Joker's room in the attic for some hot and steamy character development. An expresses some worries about getting caught as part of the Phantom Thieves by the police, and Joker, being his empathetic self, remembers a conversation he had with Sai earlier.
If that happens, there's no telling what they'll do to you or your teammates. There's even the possibility that they'll fabricate a crime and move to arrest you all.
In order to protect his girlfriend and the rest of his teammates from the police, he realized that he must turn himself in. An, having been dating Joker seriously for about 6 months now, is able to pick up on Joker acting a bit troubled. And Joker, for the first time in their relationship, has to tell a lie to save his girlfriend. An seems to buy it for a moment, but as soon as she gets up and is about to leave, she says this.
You're hiding something from me, aren't you? I wish you had just told me.
Based on a lifetime of being bullied and discriminated against as a Hafu living in Japan, An can recognize when people are being disingenuous towards her. The way An delivers this line also really does hurt a lot more than any other romance in the game in my opinion, especially considering that she's only had 2 friends since living in Japan, in Shiho and Joker. An has placed her absolute trust in Joker the game because he's always been there for her, and is part of the reason why she's become the confident badass that she is. This is why if you cheat on her in Persona 5, she does this.
So you already have a favorite? I came to say hello yesterday. but when I looked in the window, you were with someone else. You dick!
On, when Joker's cheating on her within Persona 5, is the only one to be completely blunt about her thoughts and feelings towards Joker. She straight up calls Joker a dick, while everyone else is passive-aggressive towards Joker about the revelation. This is the worst thing Joker could have done to An, as by cheating on her, Joker has proven that he's not much better than, say, Kamoshida. All his efforts to make An a better person by seeming being a good person on the outside are moot, because he's manipulated An much like Kamoshida has done to her. This is why I say An at the beach scene has reached her highest potential, and why her laughing at Ryuji reflects a new outlook on both her life and herself. An has repaid her debt to Shiho by becoming a more focused and inspirational individual for everyone, and this is an attitude that she carries until the end of the game. Her new outlook on life is reflected in the final possible bit of dialogue Joker has within the game with her, where she's preparing once again to study and work abroad as a model, but the key difference this time being that she's doing this of her own accord. She's not being dragged around the world by her parents this time. An herself has been researching foreign cultures, places to live, her ideal schools and universities she wants to attend, and that's not even the cool part. Take a listen.
By the way, a little girl stopped me the other day in Shibuya. She said she saw me in magazines, and that she wants to be just like me when she grows up. It felt incredible. Oh, right. Vague did a special piece on me in this month's issue. I said it all in the interview, but I'm gonna work hard. One day, I'll be modeling across the world. I've gotta reach people. I want to give someone hope, like you did for me. Thank you for all you've done. The days I spent with you were some of the brightest in my life. Once I'm a star, I'm gonna shine even brighter though. So you watch out for me.
What a fantastic way to end Persona 5, An's character arc, and this very video. An has taken full control of her life, and she's even used her platform to inspire others by fulfilling her promise to Shiho. When An says that she's gonna shine as a model, I completely believe her. Nothing can stop her now. Our resident Hafu was once the victim of relentless bullying, discrimination, and sexual assault. She once thought herself powerless to fight against Kamoshida's abuse and Japanese society's expectations of her. She had the power to break free from Kamoshida's abuse at any time. She just couldn't figure that out until it was too late, due to Japanese society conditioning on that her looks and individuality are harmful to her. Her Persona Awakening Fentanthi's outfit spits in the face of this, as they were inspired by various femme fatales and historians preserving problematic cultural landmarks. An's titillating catsuit reflects what makes her unique, and Persona 5 should be commended for bluntly having her flaunt what makes her stand out, like the many femme fatales that she was inspired by. How else better tackle a subject like the human condition, the pitfalls of working in the model industry at a young age, and the victims of sexual and emotional abuse, than to be completely blunt in its presentation? An's journey through Persona 5 is truly inspiring. She went from a lonely girl considered by many to be a bunch of rude different things, to realizing that she doesn't need to take their shit anymore. Electing to say, tra-la-la-la-la, cut me, burn me, or more appropriately, watashi o kite mayusu. And chooses instead to take those insults in stride by bettering herself, and in turn, inspiring others to do the same. This is a truly powerful message that Salari unfortunately undercuts by doing this in his video. Salari uses footage from the Transformer films as examples of showing what the male gaze can do to a film or any other form of media. It comes off as incredibly reductionist and incredibly dishonest. This sets up another false dichotomy within the same video, in addition to Solari's claims about female representation in anime. Citing footage from a film series whose director fetishizes explosions, the US military, and Megan Fox is a disservice to An's character arc, which is one about redemption and reestablishing control in her life. The Transformer women were designed by the script to be one-dimensional objects for the audience to eye-fuck. That much I will agree on. However, I cannot agree on comparing these two fucking objects to the three-dimensional character that is Persona 5's An Takamaki, based on the fact that you don't like how she's dressed in the metaverse. Boiling down every bit of character growth to because the patriarchy said so is fucking crazy. It is a disservice to every nuanced female character that anyone ever created because it views all women as victims of the patriarchy, despite whatever the story is trying to convey through that character's place within a story. If we take into account everything that I've said about An so far, then that leaves us with only one logical conclusion. An's character arc isn't about objectifying women or sexual abuse. While an important part in its construction, An's character arc is primarily about the amount of casual racism, discrimination, and objectification Hafu like her experienced while living in Japan, through having An bluntly flaunt what makes her an individual within a collectivist society through her character designs. This means that her blatant objectification through the game is played straight for a reason, as it's a clear way to add to her character and use An as a vehicle to tell a story. And on that note, I think we're done here. This has been XBadgerKnightX, and I'd like to thank you all for watching the end of this rather lengthy response video. And if I truly did steal your heart and make you think differently about Persona 5 or something else I discussed within this very video, be sure to tell me down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and subscribe to my channel for all future content. In my next video, we're going to be analyzing the character Garrus Vakarian of Mass Effect fame, as part of my Dichotomy of a Character series, and why I not only find him to be a well-written and compelling character in fiction, but also the ideal best friend. That video will be uploaded soon, so do keep an eye on those sub boxes. Until then guys, this has been XBadgerKnightX, and I will see you guys next time. I'm out of here, and goodbye for now.
Think again, don't you know what just that